I watched my own son drop to his knees on the cold marble floor of the bank, crying for mercy as the police cuffed his hands behind his back. My name is Ruth, and to him and his greedy girlfriend, I was just a clueless old woman, too out of touch to understand their scheme. What they didn't know is that this clueless woman is a retired IT professor, and I used the very technology they underestimated to set a trap they never saw coming. Have you ever been completely underestimated by someone you love? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. The silence in my Scottsdale home wasn't an emptiness. It was a composition. It was the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the distant whisper of the wind through the Palo Verde trees, and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock Frank had bought at an estate sale and lovingly restored with his own hands. This silence was peace, a quiet sanctuary earned through 45 years of shared laughter, quiet struggles, and unwavering partnership. It was a peace paid for with Frank's overtime shifts at the engineering firm and my long nights grading papers from the community college. Now, as the late afternoon sun cast long, golden fingers across the terracotta tiles, I was beginning to realize that this hard-won peace was under siege, not from a stranger, but from my own blood. My gaze drifted, as it often did, to the silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was Frank, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his smile as warm and genuine as the Arizona sun. We were on a trip to Sedona. The red rocks a stunning backdrop to the quiet joy on our faces. He'd always been the pragmatist, the anchor to my more trusting nature. His voice, a low, gentle rumble I could still conjure on demand, echoed in my memory. "Ruth, you see the good in everyone, and that's a gift," he used to say, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. "But always trust your gut. It's the one compass that never breaks." His words had never felt so prophetic, so loud in the quiet of my heart, as they did on this particular Sunday afternoon. The rich, savory scent of rosemary and garlic chicken roasting in the oven filled the house, an aroma that had always been the very essence of warmth and family. But as I set the heavy ceramic plates for three, a subtle tension clung to the air, thicker and more suffocating than the fragrant herbs. Hunter, my only son, arrived with his girlfriend Chelsea, precisely on time, a punctuality that felt more like a strategy than a courtesy. He gave me a quick, distracted hug, his cheek barely grazing mine, his eyes already darting around the room as if assessing its contents rather than its occupant. Chelsea, however, swept in like a perfumed whirlwind, all flashing smiles and sharp, expensive fragrance. Her smile was as bright and meticulously constructed as the cubic zirconia on her finger. "Ruth, darling, the house smells absolutely divine," she chirped, placing a bottle of cheap, cloyingly sweet Moscato on my granite countertop as if it were a grand offering from a visiting queen. She looked around, her eyes taking in the comfortable, well-loved furniture. "It's all so classic." The word hung in the air. A backhanded compliment that suggested dated and old. Dinner started with a fragile veneer of civility. I spoke about my new volunteer class at the Desert Botanical Garden, about the simple, profound joy of teaching children how to coax life from a tiny seedling. Hunter nodded along, a vacant expression on his face, though I could see the telltale blue glow of his phone screen reflecting in his pupils from under the table. Chelsea listened with a practiced, intense focus, her head tilted at a perfect, sympathetic angle. "That's just so wonderful, Ruth," she said, her voice dripping with a counterfeit sweetness that set my teeth on edge. "It's so important to have hobbies, to keep busy." Then, just as I brought out the apple pie, Frank's favorite recipe, which I still made from memory, she made her move. It was orchestrated, a well-rehearsed play. "Speaking of nurturing things and watching them grow," she began, placing her perfectly manicured hand over Hunter's. He flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but I saw it. "Hunter and I have come across the most incredible investment opportunity. It's real estate, just outside of town in the path of development. The potential for growth is just explosive." Hunter looked up from his phone, finally meeting my eyes for a brief, uncomfortable second before his gaze skittered away. "It's a sure thing, Mom. Pre-development plots. We're talking ground floor. We just need a little bit of capital to secure our spot." I placed a slice of pie in front of him, my hands steady despite the sudden, icy chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I had seen this coming for weeks in the leading questions. The sudden attentiveness, the cloying flattery. It was all a prelude. "How much capital?" I asked, my voice even, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. Hunter cleared his throat, looking to Chelsea for his cue as he had done his entire life. It was she who answered, her voice smooth and confident. $50,000. The number landed on the table between us, audacious and obscene. $50,000. It wasn't just a number, it was the vacations we'd postponed to pay for Hunter's college. It was the down payment on this very house. It was Frank's pension, a sacred fund meant to ensure I would never be a burden to anyone. Chelsea saw the flicker of shock on my face and leaned forward, her smile turning predatory, the friendly mask slipping to reveal the cold ambition beneath. "Think of it as an advance on Hunter's inheritance, Ruth. It's money that will come to him eventually anyway. Why not put it to good use now, for his future? For our future?" That was it. The casual dismissal of my life, my autonomy, my future. The raw, naked assumption that everything I had, everything Frank and I had built, was simply a holding place for their desires. I looked past her lacquered smile, directly at my son, the boy I had raised to be honest and hard-working, the boy who cried when he stepped on a snail in the garden. I saw the shame and conflict warring in his eyes, but I also saw the deep, character-defining weakness that allowed her to pull his strings. After a long, heavy moment that stretched into an eternity, I gave my answer, my voice quiet, but forged from unshakable steel. The answer, Hunter, is no. The rest of the evening was a blur of strained, suffocating silence. They left soon after, the pie barely touched. As they stood at the door, Chelsea's face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. Hunter, however, paused. He turned back, his face shadowed in the dim porch light. He looked at me, and for a fleeting, heartbreaking second, I saw the lost little boy I missed so dearly. But then the expression hardened, his features settling into a resentful mask I barely recognized. His voice was a low, chilling whisper, a promise that coiled in the warm night air. "You'll regret not trusting me, Mom." I couldn't sleep that night. Hunter's words replayed in my head, each syllable a tiny, sharp stone thrown against the window of my peace. It wasn't the anger in his voice that kept me awake. It was the chilling finality, a sound that wasn't a complaint, but a warning. Tossing and turning, I stared at the faint red light of the Nest Cam I had mounted in the corner of my bedroom. I remembered installing the whole system myself a few years after Frank passed. The kids at the community college where I taught had joked about me being a secret agent grandma. I'd just laughed and told myself it was for peace of mind, a simple precaution for a woman living alone. I never, in my darkest imaginings, suspected it would end up recording my worst nightmare. The timestamp on the recording I would later watch, over and over until the images were burned into my memory, read 2:16 a.m., Monday, October 13th, 2025. The living room was bathed in the grainy, monochrome glow of the camera's night vision. Two figures emerged from the guest room where they had pretended to go to bed hours earlier. It was Hunter and Chelsea. "I can't believe you let her say no." Chelsea's voice was a venomous whisper, sharp enough for the camera's microphone to pick up clearly. "After everything we've planned, are you a man or a mouse, Hunter?" "It's her money, Chelsea," Hunter whispered back, his broad shoulders slumped in defeat. He paced the length of my Persian rug, the one Frank had bought me for our anniversary. "What do you want me to do? Steal it?" "Don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, stepping in front of him, blocking his path. Her silhouette was wiry and tense. "It's not stealing when it's rightfully yours. We deserve that money. I deserve a life better than this, and you're the one who's supposed to give it to me." The manipulation was so blatant, so cruel, it made my stomach clench even in retrospect. She laid out the plan with the cold precision of a general. "You know she keeps her wallet on the nightstand, and you told me she's so old-fashioned she still writes her PIN down on a piece of paper. You go in, you take a picture of the card, front and back, and that little piece of paper. No one gets hurt. She'll never even know." The hallway camera captured the next moment in painful detail. Hunter stood frozen for a full minute, his face a mask of conflict. His hand, the same hand I used to hold when he was a boy scared of the dark, was trembling. He looked towards my bedroom door, then back at Chelsea. She gave him a sharp, impatient nod. With a deep, shuddering breath, he complied. He moved down the hallway with a practiced stealth that horrified me. The camera lost him as he slipped into the darkness of my bedroom, a room that had always been his sanctuary, now the scene of his crime. The seconds stretched into an eternity. I saw Chelsea waiting impatiently, tapping her foot on the hardwood floor. Then he reappeared, a ghostly figure stepping back into the light of the hallway. He held his phone up to her, the screen's glow illuminating his pale, guilt-ridden face. He walked back into the living room, slumping onto the sofa as if his strings had been cut. Chelsea checked the photos on his phone, a triumphant smirk visible even in the grainy footage. She leaned down and kissed him, not with affection, but with the satisfaction of a master claiming her prize. Hunter looked up at her, his eyes hollow. He whispered the words that would haunt me forever. "Done. This Friday. We're going to be rich." Chelsea reached over and turned off the living room lamp. The screen plunged into absolute darkness, the recording ending abruptly. And in that void, the truth of their betrayal settled, a heavy, suffocating blanket waiting for the light of day to be discovered. The next morning, on Tuesday, October 14th, life had seemingly settled back into its quiet rhythm. The Arizona sun streamed through my office window, casting a warm glow on the oak desk Frank had built for me. Yet, a vague sense of unease lingered, a shadow I couldn't quite place. Hunter's threat hung in the air like unspoken static. I tried to dismiss it, busying myself with a small but irritating technical problem. The Wi-Fi on my laptop kept dropping, a nuisance that would frustrate most people into calling for help. For me, it was a familiar puzzle. Before retiring, I spent 30 years teaching network administration at Scottsdale Community College. My fingers flew across the keyboard, opening the command prompt, typing in ipconfig, flush DNs, and then navigating through the network adapter settings. It was a language I was fluent in, a world of logic and order that Hunter and Chelsea believed I knew nothing about. As the connection stabilized, a notification banner slid into the top corner of my screen, an email from Chase Bank. The subject line was simple: "Security alert. A recent transaction was declined." My brow furrowed. I clicked it open. The email was brief and to the point. "Dear Ruth Hayes, we have declined a charge of $5.99 from Global Web Services on your Chase Sapphire card ending in 4321. Global Web Services? I'd never heard of them. It was a small amount. A test charge. The kind someone makes when they've stolen a card number and want to see if it's active before making a larger purchase. A professional chill, devoid of panic, washed over me. I didn't gasp. I didn't feel my heart race. I simply acted. Reaching for my smartphone, I unlocked it with a touch of my thumb and opened the Chase mobile app. The interface was as familiar to me as my own kitchen. Within seconds, I was in the card management section. My gaze fell on the large, reassuringly blue button labeled Freeze Card. I tapped it without a moment's hesitation. A confirmation screen appeared. Your card has been frozen. No further transactions will be approved. It was done. Swift, clean, decisive. This was not the reaction of a confused, helpless old woman. I leaned back in my chair. The scent of my morning coffee suddenly sharp in the air. The pieces began to connect in my mind, forming a picture I didn't want to see. The strange, small charge, the timing, just 2 days after our confrontation, and Hunter's parting words, heavy with unspoken menace. Frank's voice echoed in my memory, "Always trust your gut, Ruth." And my gut was screaming. My eyes drifted to the Nest application icon on my desktop. I'd installed the cameras for peace of mind, to watch for package deliveries or unfamiliar cars. I had never felt the need to review the footage. It was a deterrent, not a tool for domestic espionage. But now, an icy certainty was taking root in my heart. I had to know. My hand, steady until this moment, trembled slightly as I moved the mouse. I opened the app, the timeline of recordings stretching back for days. I navigated to Sunday night. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a slow, heavy drumbeat. I scrolled through the uneventful clips, me turning off the lights, the cat wandering through the living room. And then I saw it. A file timestamped at 2:16 a.m. The label read, "Living room, motion detected." I stared at the thumbnail for a long moment, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "You're being paranoid, Ruth," I whispered to the empty room, the sound of my own voice startlingly loud. My finger hovered over the trackpad, a breath away from the truth. But, I took a deep, shaky breath. Better safe than sorry. I clicked play. My coffee grew cold in my hands as I replayed the video, and with each loop, the world I thought I knew grew colder too. The grainy, night vision footage showed my living room, my sanctuary, twisted into a conspirator's den. I heard Chelsea's sharp, avaricious whispers, a snake in my garden poisoning my son's mind. It's not stealing when it's rightfully yours. I saw Hunter, my Hunter, his shoulders slumped, his voice a weak defense against her relentless greed. My eyes flickered to the small framed photo on my desk, Hunter at age 7, a gap-toothed grin on his face, proudly holding up a crayon drawing of our family. That little boy would have cried if he'd scraped his knee. The man on the screen was about to shatter his mother's heart, and the contrast was a physical ache in my chest. Then came the second clip, the one from the hallway. I watched, my breath caught in my throat, as my son hesitated before my bedroom door. For a terrible, hopeful second, I thought he would turn back. I prayed he would, but he didn't. He slipped into the room, my room, a space so sacred with memories of his father, a space he had always respected. A choked sob escaped my lips as the video showed him emerging minutes later, holding his phone up like a trophy. The betrayal was absolute, a violation so profound it felt like a physical assault. The tears I had been holding back finally broke free. I buried my face in my hands and wept, not with quiet sadness, but with raw, ragged sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for the boy I had lost, for the trust that had been annihilated, for the 40 years of love and sacrifice that had culminated in this sordid, secret crime. My office, once a place of quiet contemplation, now felt like a tomb, the walls closing in on me. The tears eventually subsided, leaving behind a hollow, echoing void. And in that void, something new began to form. The grief, hot and searing, started to cool, crystallizing into something hard and sharp. It was anger, a cold, clear, and focused rage I hadn't felt in decades. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, my movements no longer shaky, but deliberate. I sat up straight, my spine rigid. The weeping was over. The time for action had begun. My fingers, once trembling, now moved with the steady precision of my former profession. I opened a new folder on my desktop, naming it simply Evidence. I downloaded the video files from the Nest cloud, the progress bar a slow, methodical crawl towards justice. I copied them onto a brand new encrypted USB drive that I kept in my desk drawer for important backups. Every click of the mouse was a declaration. Every saved file was a nail in a coffin they had built for themselves. I cataloged everything, the date, the timestamp, the exact words spoken. I was no longer a grieving mother. I was an archivist of my own heartbreak, building a case against my own son. When I was finished, I leaned back, the screen of my laptop now dark. In the polished black surface, I saw my reflection. The woman staring back was a stranger. Her eyes weren't filled with the soft, forgiving warmth of a mother. They were narrowed, glinting with a hard, steely light I didn't recognize. The lines around my mouth were not etched with sadness, but with a grim, unyielding resolve. In that moment, watching the video, something inside me had broken. Yes, but something else had been forged in the fire. I picked up my smartphone, my thumb scrolling through the contacts list with purpose. I passed Hunter's name without a flicker of emotion. I scrolled past old friends, past the number for the garden club, until I found it. A name I hadn't dialed in years, a relic from a life with Frank, David Davies. He was the only person I knew I could trust with this. My finger hovered over the call button. "They picked the wrong opponent," I whispered, the words a quiet, dangerous promise to the empty room. "Ruth? What's wrong?" David's voice on the other end was full of genuine concern, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt I wasn't entirely alone. The sound of his voice brought back a flood of memories, of him and Frank on fishing trips, their laughter echoing across the lake, of the steadfast friendship that had defined their lives. If there was one person Frank trusted implicitly, it was David Davies. An hour later, I was sitting across from him in his office at the Chase branch on Scottsdale Road. The room was a fortress of quiet professionalism, a large mahogany desk, plush leather chairs, and a floor-to-ceiling window that looked out onto the manicured lawns. It felt safe. I opened my laptop, took a steadying breath, and turned the screen towards him. "I need you to see this, David." I didn't speak. I let the silent, grainy footage tell the story. I watched David's face as he saw my son, the boy he'd known since birth, conspire with his girlfriend in my living room. I saw his jaw tighten, his knuckles turn white as he gripped the arm of his chair. When the second video played, showing Hunter creeping into my bedroom, David let out a low, guttural sound of disbelief. He pushed the laptop away, his face a storm of shock and vicarious fury. That ungrateful little... He couldn't finish the sentence. "He tried to use the card this morning," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion I had purged the night before. "A test charge. I froze the account immediately." "Good," David snapped, his banker's mind kicking into gear. He was already pulling up my account on his monitor, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "The freeze is active. I'll put an additional security flag on it from my end. No one but you, in person, with a photo ID, can access this account from now on, not even with the correct PIN." He looked up from his screen, his eyes hard. "They'll try again, Ruth. They think you're unaware." "I know," I said. "And that's our advantage. I don't just want to stop them, David. I want to catch them." I leaned forward, my plan taking shape as I spoke. "I want to set a trap, a play, right here in your bank." I laid out the idea, my voice gaining strength with every word. I would call Hunter, pretend to have had a change of heart, and agree to meet him here. He would walk in, confident and triumphant, ready to claim his prize. And we would be waiting. David listened, his expression shifting from anger to a look of grim admiration. He nodded slowly, a small, dangerous smile playing on his lips. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze locking with mine. "Frank would never forgive me if I let this happen to you," he said, his voice low and firm. "Trust me, Ruth. We're going to teach them a lesson they will never forget." A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. I had an ally, a powerful one. The first step was complete. "The next step is even more important," I told him, my voice now steady and cold as steel. "We need the police." Stepping into the Scottsdale Police Department felt like crossing into a foreign country, a place with its own language of procedure and dispassionate logic. But as the glass doors slid shut behind me, silencing the street noise, I knew this was where justice began. I was led to a small, windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. A few moments later, a woman in her late 30s entered. She wore a simple pantsuit and had sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm Detective Miller," she said, her voice professional but not unkind. I nodded, placing the encrypted USB drive on the cool metal table between us. "My friend, David Davies from Chase Bank, suggested I speak with you." I explained the situation, my voice low and even, detailing the events of the past few days. When I finished, she looked at me with an expression that was more than just professional sympathy. It was a look of profound understanding. "Financial abuse by a family member," she said, her voice softening slightly. "It's a particularly ugly kind of betrayal. I've seen it up close." That small admission, that hint of personal connection, solidified my trust in her. She inserted the USB drive into her department-issued laptop. As she watched the grainy night vision footage, her face remained impassive, but I saw a muscle twitch in her jaw. She watched the entire recording of Hunter and Chelsea's conspiracy, then the clip of Hunter creeping down my hallway. She didn't flinch. She simply absorbed the facts. When the video ended, she closed the laptop and looked at me, her gaze clear and direct. "Mrs. Hayes, what you have here is not a family squabble. This is a clear, premeditated conspiracy to commit a felony. The evidence is unequivocal." Her words were a validation, a legal stamp on the painful truth I had uncovered. The weight of being a paranoid, grieving widow lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't crazy. I was a victim of a crime. "My friend at the bank and we have a plan," I began, and I laid out the idea of the trap, the staged meeting at the bank. Detective Miller listened intently, nodding. "A controlled operation," she said, the professional term making my plan sound both serious and official. "It's a solid strategy. With your cooperation, we can catch him in the act." "It makes for an ironclad case." She explained the legal procedure, how 2 of her officers would be in plain clothes inside the bank, acting as customers. Another marked patrol car would be waiting discreetly down the street. The bank manager, Mr. Davies, would give the signal at the moment Hunter presented the stolen card information. "It's crucial that you act naturally," she warned. "He cannot suspect a thing." I met her gaze, the last vestiges of my fear burning away, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. "Detective," I said, "for the last 48 hours, I have been acting. I can assure you my performance will be convincing." A small, grim smile touched her lips. She stood up and extended her hand. It was a firm, reassuring grip. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice now carrying the full weight of her authority. "We won't just be protecting your assets. We're going to get you justice." I left the police station, the phone heavy in my pocket. It was time to call my son. The curtain was about to rise. I took a deep breath, the hot air of the Safeway parking lot thick in my lungs, and dialed Hunter's number. The voice about to come from my mouth would be the most convincing lie of my life, a performance worthy of a stage I never wanted. He answered on the 3rd ring, his tone wary, clipped. "Hello?" "Hunter?" I began, summoning every ounce of maternal vulnerability I had, forcing a tremble into my voice that wasn't entirely fake. "It's Mom." The silence on the other end was heavy with suspicion. I knew this was the most delicate part. I had raised him, and despite his recent actions, a part of him still responded to the mother who had kissed his scraped knees and read him bedtime stories. I had to use that part of him, the memory of that love, as my weapon. I'm so sorry about Sunday," I whispered, letting my voice crack just a little. "I was harsh. I shouldn't have dismissed you like that." "What's this about, Mom?" he asked, his voice still guarded, cold. He was expecting a lecture, not an apology. This was my opening. "I've just been thinking," I continued, my gaze fixed on a family loading groceries into their minivan, a perfect picture of the life I thought I had. "A lot. Maybe you and Chelsea are right." I paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Maybe at my age I'm not seeing things as clearly as I used to. It's hard, being alone, making all these decisions by myself. Frank was always so good with this stuff. I let out a small, fabricated sigh of a weary old woman. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. The shift in his tone was immediate, from defensive to patronizing. "Well, Mom, it's not that you're not seeing clearly," he said, his voice now laced with condescending reassurance. "It's just that the world is different now, faster. We just want to help you make the most of what you have." He had swallowed the bait completely. In his mind, I had just confirmed his entire narrative. I was an old, lonely, and slightly confused woman who needed his brilliant guidance. "I know, honey. I know you do," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I don't want to do anything rash, but I think we should talk to someone at the bank. Maybe Mr. Davies could explain some options." "You could come with me? Help me understand the paperwork." I framed it as a request for his help, stroking his ego, making him the hero of the story. The triumph in his voice was unmistakable. "Of course, Mom. I'll clear my schedule. When were you thinking? Would Friday morning work? Say 10 o'clock? "Friday at 10 is perfect," he said, his voice now bright, confident. Then I heard it. A triumphant, muffled squeal in the background. It was Chelsea. The sound was so full of avarice it made my skin crawl. "I knew you wouldn't let me down, Mom," Hunter said, his voice dripping with false affection. "See you Friday." I hung up the phone, my hand falling limply into my lap. I stared blankly at the shoppers pushing their carts under the relentless Arizona sun, their ordinary lives a world away from the cold. Calculated play I was now directing. The performance was over. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the curtain to fall. The 2 days leading up to Friday stretched into a century. With every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, I found myself questioning the path I had chosen. Was this justice, or was it a mother's cruelest act? The line had blurred, and I was adrift in the gray, suffocating space in between. On Thursday afternoon, I found myself in the attic, the air thick with the scent of cedar and thyme. I mechanically pulled down a dusty cardboard box labeled Hunter's Keepsakes. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside lay the ghost of the son I once knew. His bronzed baby shoe, so tiny it fit in the palm of my hand. A first-grade report card from 2000, with a gold star next to "Shows kindness to others." A photograph of him at 10, beaming with pride on the new Schwinn bicycle Frank and I had saved for months to buy him. He was a picture of scraped knees and unbridled joy. I traced the outline of his smiling face with my finger, a single tear escaping and landing on the glossy paper. Where had that boy gone? When did the light in his eyes dim and get replaced by the cold, calculating glint I'd seen in the video? I was mourning a loss that had happened so gradually I hadn't even noticed until it was complete. This wasn't just a theft of money, it was the theft of a soul, and I was losing him all over again. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me, pulling me from my reverie. It was a text from Hunter. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Do you need me to help you get any paperwork together for the bank tomorrow? Let me know." The hypocrisy of it, the false solicitude, was a physical blow. He wasn't offering to help me. He was offering to help himself carry the loot. I stared at the message, the counterfeit concern chilling me to the bone. I deleted it without replying. That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't reach. The hours crawled by. At a little past 11 p.m. on Thursday, October 16th, I made a final, quiet phone call. Detective Miller answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional. "Everything is in place, Mrs. Hayes," she confirmed. "Mr. Davies has briefed the teller. My officers will be in position at 9:45 a.m. All you need to do is walk in with your son. We will handle the rest." Her calm, procedural tone was a strange comfort. It reminded me that this was no longer just my personal tragedy. It was a matter for the law. "Thank you, Detective," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for believing me." There was a pause. "Get some rest, Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "Tomorrow will be a difficult day." After the call, I walked into my bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was tired, her face etched with a grief that felt ancient. The plan was set. The trap was laid. There was no turning back now. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the weary eyes in the glass, "I'm going to lose a son." I paused, the terrible truth settling in my soul. "But maybe," I added, my voice breaking on the final word, "I lost him a long time ago." Friday morning arrived, cool and bright, the sky a mocking, cloudless blue. At precisely 9:30 a.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Hunter standing on my porch. He was dressed in a crisp button-down shirt, his hair perfectly styled. He was holding a small bouquet of flowers, and his face was split by a sickeningly bright smile. "You look great, Mom," Hunter said as I stepped out onto the porch, the bouquet of cheap carnations a jarring splash of color against his crisp shirt. The compliment, on this day from his lips, felt less like a kindness and more like an insult. He was admiring the sheep he was about to lead to slaughter. The drive to the bank on Friday, October 17th, was thick with an artificial cheerfulness that was almost suffocating. The interior of his Toyota Camry was immaculately clean, smelling of new plastic and a pine tree air freshener. Outside, the world was alive with the bright, harsh light of a Scottsdale morning, but inside, it felt like we were in a soundproof bubble, hurtling towards an unavoidable collision. Unable to sit in silence, Hunter filled the space with his voice, a monologue of a future built on a foundation of lies. "First thing is paying off Chelsea's student loans," he began, his eyes bright with unearned victory. "Wipe the slate clean. Then a down payment on a house. We've been looking at a place in Paradise Valley. It has a pool. No more renting for us." He glanced at me, expecting a reaction, but I kept my face a neutral mask, my gaze fixed on the passing strip malls. Every word was another twist of the knife. I focused on my breathing, a calm anchor in a sea of silent rage. Not once did he mention helping me. Not once did he talk about saving for his own retirement, for a future beyond the next shiny object. It was all for her, all for now. He didn't seem to notice my silence. "And a new car for her, of course," he continued, his voice full of a magnanimity he hadn't earned. "She's been wanting a Mercedes, just a small one. She deserves it. She's been so patient." Patient. The word was so absurd I almost laughed. As we passed a gleaming glass and steel office tower still under construction, he pointed a finger. "See that building, Mom? The Palmer Tower. Chelsea and I are looking at leasing an office on the top floor. For the new business, the views are incredible." He said it with such absolute certainty, as if the $50,000 were already a settled matter, a mere formality. Finally, he pulled into the sprawling parking lot of the Chase Bank branch. He turned off the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. He turned to me, his face glowing with a smug, proprietary pride. "Ready to change your life, Mom?" I met his gaze, and for the first time since he had arrived, I allowed myself a small, tight smile. It was a smile he didn't understand, one filled with a pity and a sorrow so deep it felt like ice. "Oh, absolutely," I said, my voice soft and even. "Someone's life is about to change forever." He got out of the car, a spring in his step, and came around to open my door with a flourish of false chivalry. Together, we walked across the hot asphalt and through the heavy glass doors of the bank. Inside, the air conditioning was a sudden shock, and the lobby was strangely, unnaturally quiet. David Davies emerged from his office, his professional smile perfectly in place, not a crack to be seen. "Ruth, good to see you. And Hunter, welcome." He shook my hand, then Hunter's, his grip firm and businesslike. Hunter puffed out his chest slightly, clearly pleased to be acknowledged with such respect. As David led us toward his office, my eyes scanned the quiet lobby. My gaze landed on two men sitting in the waiting area. They didn't look like typical bank customers. Dressed in nondescript polo shirts and slacks, they seemed too alert, too focused. One was engrossed in a copy of the Wall Street Journal, but his eyes weren't moving across the page. They were watching the reflection in the polished marble floor. They were not here to open a savings account. David's office was just as I remembered it, a calm oasis of dark wood and quiet competence. He closed the door, shutting out the rest of the world, and gestured for us to sit in the leather chairs opposite his desk. The air was still, pregnant with unspoken tension. Hunter could barely contain his excitement, leaning forward in his seat as if ready to spring. "So," David began, folding his hands on the desk, "Ruth tells me you're interested in exploring some investment vehicles for her portfolio. It's a wise move. We have several excellent options, from conservative mutual funds to more aggressive growth stocks." He launched into a smooth, practiced speech, a performance so convincing it almost made me forget it was a complete fabrication. He was speaking a language Hunter understood and respected, the language of money and opportunity. Hunter nodded along, his expression growing more self-assured by the second. "Exactly," he interjected. "We want to be aggressive. Mom's been too conservative for too long. It's time to make her money work for her, for us." "I understand completely," David said, his face a perfect mask of helpfulness. He swiveled his chair slightly. "Before we dive into the specifics, there's a small bit of standard procedure we need to handle. For a transaction of this potential size, I need to do a quick identity and account verification. It will only take a moment." He pressed a button on his desk intercom. "Sarah, could you step in for a moment, please?" A young woman, the teller Detective Miller had described to me, entered the office. She had a pleasant, neutral expression. She was part of the play. "Sarah will just verify the card information on file," David explained smoothly. He then turned his calm, professional gaze to my son. "Hunter, since you'll likely be a signatory on the new accounts, would you mind providing her with the card information you acquired? The numbers from the front and back, the expiration date, everything. Just for our records." This was the moment, the fulcrum on which everything balanced. Hunter's face broke into a wide, triumphant grin. He had won. In his mind, the final piece of the puzzle was clicking into place. With a flourish of practiced casualness, he pulled out his phone, opened his photo gallery, and began to read the numbers aloud with the confidence of a king. "Okay, it's a Chase Sapphire. Card number is 49295678. Sarah took out a small notepad, jotting down the numbers as he spoke, her expression neutral. As Hunter read the final 3 digits of the CVV code from the back of the card, her eyes briefly met his, then flickered down to the pad in her hand. She examined it for a beat, her expression unreadable. Then she slowly lifted her head, looked directly at David Davies, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal. The moment Sarah nodded, a quiet finality settled over the room, as profound and absolute as the closing of a vault door. In that infinitesimal space between her nod and the world catching up, time seemed to stretch and thin. I could hear the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the bank's air conditioning system, a sound I hadn't noticed until now. I felt the smooth, cool grain of the mahogany armrest beneath my fingers. I saw a mote of dust dance in a sunbeam slanting through David's pristine window. It was a moment of hyper-clarity, the world sharpening into focus just before it shattered. Frank's words from years ago surfaced in my mind, a quiet mantra against the chaos to come. "Justice comes quietly sometimes, Ruth, but it always comes." The quiet had arrived. The click of the office door opening was the only sound that broke the spell. It was not a loud noise, but in the suffocating silence, it sounded like a gunshot. The 2 men I'd noticed in the lobby stepped inside, their movements calm, economical, and utterly purposeful. There was no hesitation. The taller one moved to the side, his body subtly blocking the path to the door. The other one closed the door behind them, the latch catching with a soft, definitive snick. The sound sealed the 4 of us in. The quiet oasis of David's office had just become a cage. Hunter's smug expression, the one he'd worn like a crown since my phone call, began to falter. It didn't vanish all at once, but rather eroded at the edges, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He looked from the impassive faces of the new arrivals to David, whose professional smile had vanished, leaving behind a grim, stony visage. Finally, his eyes darted to me, searching for a familiar anchor in this suddenly strange tide. He found none. My face was a placid lake, and he was sinking. A question was forming on his lips, a bubble of indignant protest. Before he could speak, the taller of the two men addressed him. "Hunter Thorne?" he asked, his voice a flat, official monotone that held no room for negotiation or argument. It was the voice of a man who dealt in facts, not feelings. "Yes?" Hunter answered, his own voice a little too high, a little too thin. He tried to inject a note of authority into it, of a busy man being interrupted. "What is this about? We're in the middle of a private meeting." "We need you to answer a few questions, sir," the second officer said, his eyes never leaving my son's face. His gaze was heavy, analytical. It wasn't a request. Panic, raw and unadulterated, finally broke through Hunter's carefully constructed composure. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, pale shade under the office's fluorescent lights. "Questions? About what? Is this some kind of a joke?" He pushed himself to his feet, the legs of his expensive leather chair scraping harshly against the floor. He turned to me, his bravado crumbling into a desperate, pleading bewilderment. "Mom, what's going on? Tell them! This is a mistake. Tell them who I am." He was appealing to a lifetime of me fixing his problems, of me smoothing things over. He still saw me as his safety net, even now. The irony was a bitter pill in my throat. I had been his safety net, and now I was the one who had cut the rope. Before I could answer, before I could deliver the final verbal blow, the office door opened a third time. Detective Miller stepped in, her expression all business. She was the conductor of this grim orchestra, arriving just in time for the crescendo. In her hand, she held a tablet computer, its screen dark and reflective. She moved with an unhurried confidence that commanded the room. The two plainclothes officers subtly straightened their posture at her arrival. She was in charge. "There's no mistake, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through his panicked denials like a surgeon's scalpel. She walked directly to David's desk and placed the tablet on its polished surface, positioning it to face Hunter. "I think this video will explain everything." Hunter stared at the tablet as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the wood. The room was so quiet I could hear the frantic, shallow rhythm of his breathing. The tablet was an object of modern technology, sleek and inert, but in that moment it felt like an ancient artifact of judgment, a scrying glass that would show not the future, but his past, his damnation. Detective Miller's finger hovered over the screen for a moment, letting the tension build to an unbearable peak. Then, with a simple, deliberate tap, she pressed play. The video began. The video began to play, ruthless and precise, its tinny, disembodied audio filling the suffocating silence of the office. The first thing to emerge from the tablet's small speakers was Chelsea's voice, sharp, greedy, and utterly devoid of warmth, followed by Hunter's weak, hollow protests. "She'll never even know." Hunter flinched as if he'd been physically struck. His eyes, wide with a dawning horror, were glued to the grainy, monochrome image of his own living room, now a conspirator's den. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, but no sound came out. The smug confidence he had worn just moments before had evaporated, replaced by the sheer terror of a man watching his own damnation unfold in real time. The video shifted to the hallway camera, the angle wider, colder. He stared, transfixed, as his own shadowy figure crept with a thief's stealth towards my bedroom door. I watched his face, not the screen. I saw the muscles in his jaw clenching and unclenching. He was watching a stranger, a villain, and the slow, agonizing realization that the villain was him was a sight of pure psychological torment. The camera's lens, my own dispassionate, technological eye, then zoomed in on his hand as he photographed the small, folded piece of paper beside my wallet. My PIN. The secret numbers that unlocked my life savings, the final bulwark Frank had left to protect me, captured by the son I had given that life to. A visible tremor started in Hunter's hands, a shudder that ran through his entire body as if a current of ice water had been shot through his veins. He stared at his own image on the tablet, a ghost from just a few nights ago, and began to shake his head, a frantic, desperate motion of denial against the undeniable. "No," he stammered, the word a choked, guttural sound. His voice, when it finally found purchase, was cracking with disbelief. "No, it's edited, it's a trick, it's a deep fake, it's not real." He turned from the tablet to me, his eyes wild with the terror of a cornered animal searching for an escape that didn't exist. "Mom, tell them. It's a misunderstanding. It's not what it looks like." The lie was so pathetic, so transparently desperate, that a wave of something colder than pity washed over me. It was a sterile, bitter validation. I had seen the truth, and now he was being forced to see it too. I was just worried about you. I was checking to make sure everything was safe. That your information was secure. Detective Miller didn't even blink. Her profound calm was a terrifying counterpoint to his burgeoning hysteria. She let his pathetic excuse hang in the air for a moment, letting its absurdity suffocate him. "A misunderstanding?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet, each word a clinical incision. She tapped her tablet again, and the audio of my phone call from the Safeway parking lot filled the room. My own voice, shaky and feigned, followed by Hunter's eager, triumphant agreement to the meeting. My lie, the one I had told to spring this very trap. "That sounds like you, Mr. Thorne," she said, her eyes boring into him, enthusiastically agreeing to participate in this misunderstanding. "Your voice doesn't sound very worried there. It sounds opportunistic." She wasn't finished. She gestured with her chin towards David, who sat like a stone statue behind his desk, his face a mask of cold fury. "Mr. Davies has provided us with a full statement confirming that this meeting was arranged under false pretenses at our specific request as part of a controlled operation." Another blow landed. Hunter staggered back a step, his face ashen. "Then," Detective Miller continued, her methodical takedown continuing without pause, "there's the matter of the test charge. An attempted transaction of $5.99 from a shell corporation called Global Web Services made against your mother's account this past Tuesday morning. I suppose that was another misunderstanding, Mr. Thorne? Just you, checking to see if her card was safe by attempting to use it yourself?" The barrage of facts, cold, hard, and undeniable, stripped him of his last shred of defense. The fight went out of him as if a plug had been pulled. His frantic denials dissolved into a choked, ragged silence. The video on the tablet finally ended, plunging the room back into a heavy, suffocating quiet, a quiet now filled with his guilt. All eyes were on him. He slowly, mechanically, turned his head to look at me, his face a complete ruin of his own making. The bravado, the greed, the condescension. It was all gone, wiped clean. All that was left was the terrified little boy, finally and irrevocably caught, his eyes swimming in tears of pure, unadulterated regret. "Mom," he whispered, the single word a universe of pleading, a desperate cry from the wreckage. But before he could say another word, before another lie or plea could form on his lips, Detective Miller gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod to the officers standing by the door. "Hunter Thorne," she said, her voice leaving no room for appeal, no hope for mercy. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit felony theft." The click of the handcuffs was a dry, metallic sound that echoed in the sudden silence of the office. It was the sound of a lock turning, a final, irreversible snap. It felt like something had just shattered, perhaps my heart, or perhaps what little was left of my family. Hunter's threat from that Sunday dinner. "You'll regret not trusting me, Mom," came rushing back, a bitter, tragic irony. Oh, someone was filled with regret, all right, but it wasn't me. The fight drained out of him all at once. His shoulders, which had been squared with a false bravado just moments before, sagged. His legs gave way, and he crumpled onto the cold marble floor, no longer a man, but a heap of broken pride. The officers stood over him, their expressions impassive, allowing the scene to play out. He didn't look at them. He didn't look at David. He looked only at me. His face, which I had just seen contorted with disbelief, was now a ruin streaked with tears. "Mom," he sobbed, the word a ragged, desperate sound. "Mom, please, don't let them do this." He shuffled forward on his knees, the cuffs scraping against the floor. "I'm sorry. I swear, I'm so sorry." I said nothing. I stood there, a statue carved from grief and resolve, and simply watched. Seeing my silence, his desperation morphed into something uglier. His eyes darted around, searching for a lifeline, and he found one in betrayal. "It wasn't me," he cried, his voice rising to a hysterical wail. "It was her. It was all Chelsea. She made me do it. She said you were old, that you didn't need the money, that it was ours for the taking. I told her no, but she pushed me. It was all her idea." The cowardice of it, the pathetic attempt to shed his own skin and pin it on the very person he had conspired with, was the final, ugly truth. It solidified everything. I had made the right choice. "Let's go," one of the officers said, pulling him gently but firmly to his feet. They led him out of David's office and into the main lobby of the bank. The few customers and tellers who were there froze, their conversations dying in their throats. A young teller gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Whispers erupted like a brush fire. I watched as they walked my son, my only child, across the polished floor in handcuffs. He was no longer a confident schemer, but a broken man, his head bowed in shame, his sobbing echoing in the cavernous space. He was a public spectacle, his downfall witnessed by strangers. As they reached the glass doors, he looked back at me one last time, his face a mess of tears and utter despair. He had lost everything, and in his eyes, I saw the full, devastating weight of that knowledge finally crash down upon him. He was gone. The doors slid shut, and the bank lobby slowly, awkwardly, returned to a semblance of normalcy. I stood there, unmoving, surrounded by the wreckage of my own making. I felt no triumph. I felt no pity. I felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. David came and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Ruth." But I knew it wasn't. For me, it had just begun. I came home alone. The silence I had once cherished now felt different. It was no longer peace, but a stark, echoing solitude. I walked through my front door and stood in the living room, the same room where the Nest Cam had recorded my son's betrayal. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, and the house felt vast and empty. My gaze fell on the dining table, on the chair where Hunter had always sat. For 40 years, that chair had been his. I waited for the familiar pang of sadness, the ache of a mother's loss. But it didn't come. Instead, there was a strange, unexpected lightness, a sense of relief. The seat was finally, truly empty. I sat on the sofa, the events at the bank replaying in my mind not as a whirlwind of emotion, but as a series of cold, hard facts. The click of the handcuffs, the look of utter devastation on Hunter's face, his pathetic last-ditch attempt to blame Chelsea. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, a sharp intrusion into the quiet. I looked at the caller ID, Detective Miller. "Just an update, Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice professional and devoid of sentiment. "We have Chelsea Dawson in custody. She's cooperating fully, blaming your son for everything. Claims he was the mastermind, that she was just an unwilling participant caught up in his scheme." I closed my eyes. Of course she was. The snakes were now eating each other. "Thank you for letting me know, Detective," I said, my voice steady. After the call, I sat in the silence for another long moment. The news about Chelsea didn't change anything, but it solidified a decision that had been forming in the back of my mind. It was a final, necessary severing. I picked up my phone again and dialed the number for my lawyer, Mr. Albright, the man Frank and I had trusted with our affairs for over 20 years. "Albright and Associates," a polite secretary answered. "This is Ruth Hayes," I said. "I need to speak with Mr. Albright. It's urgent." A moment later, his calm, familiar voice was on the line. "Ruth? I heard about what happened at the bank. I am so sorry you're going through this. How are you holding up?" "I'm holding up by moving forward, Henry," I said, cutting through the pleasantries. "I need to make a change to my will, immediately." There was a pause. "Ruth, are you certain? In the heat of the moment, sometimes—" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," I interrupted, my voice as hard and clear as glass. "I want to amend my will. I want my son, Hunter Thorne, removed entirely. He is to inherit nothing, not a penny, not a photograph, not a single memory from this house." The finality in my own voice surprised me. With those words, I felt the last, heavy chain of maternal obligation, the one that had been weighing me down for years, simply fall away. It wasn't an act of anger, it was an act of preservation. The woman who had wept in her office just days ago was gone. In her place was someone new, someone lighter. "As you wish, Ruth," he said softly. "I'll have the documents drawn up by tomorrow." After the call, I walked to my office and sat down at the desk Frank had built for me, its surface smooth and cool beneath my hands. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dimming afternoon light. My fingers, which had trembled just hours ago, were now steady as they moved over the keyboard. They typed a single destination into the search bar: Rome. 6 months later, on a warm afternoon in April of 2026, I was sitting at a small wrought iron table at an outdoor cafe in Rome, sipping a cappuccino and watching the world drift by on a cobblestone street. The air, filled with the murmur of Italian and the scent of espresso and pastries, was a world away from the dry, tense quiet of Scottsdale. Frank and I had always dreamed of this trip, of growing old together and seeing the Colosseum at sunset. I was finally here, alone, but for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel lonely. My tablet chimed softly on the table. It was an email from my lawyer, Mr. Albright. The subject line was simple: "Final disposition, Thorne." I opened it, my hand steady. The legal jargon was dense, but the conclusion was clear. Hunter had accepted a plea bargain, 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. Chelsea received a similar sentence. There would be no prison time, but they would both have felony convictions on their records for the rest of their lives. A quiet, bureaucratic end to a loud, violent betrayal. I felt no satisfaction, no anger, just a detached sense of closure. Justice, it turned out, wasn't a thunderclap. It was the quiet click of a file being closed. My neighbor had forwarded me a small stack of mail last week. Tucked inside was a letter with Hunter's handwriting on the envelope, forwarded from the county correctional facility. I had waited until this moment to read it. The letter was short, the words of a man who had lost everything. He wrote of his shame, his regret, of how Chelsea's influence and his own weakness had led him down a path he never thought he'd walk. He begged for my forgiveness. I read the letter twice. There was no rage in my heart, no desire for further revenge. There was also no rush of maternal love, no instinct to forgive and forget. There was only a profound and quiet sadness for the boy he used to be, and the man he had chosen to become. I carefully folded the letter, tucked it back into its envelope, and placed it on the table beside my empty cup. Then, looking out at the vibrant, chaotic, beautiful life of the Roman street, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, not yet. It was a smile of acceptance, a smile of peace. In that moment, under the warm Italian sun, I realized the truth. I hadn't lost a son in that bank. I had been liberated. For years, I had carried the weight of his needs, his weaknesses, his endless demands disguised as love. I had been a provider, a solution, a safety net. I had never just been a person. Now the weight was gone. The obligation was gone. The only person I was responsible for was the woman staring back at me in the reflection of the cafe window, and I was finally free to get to know her. I picked up my phone, my fingers swiping past the unread notifications and messages. I opened the camera, not to check for news from a life I had left behind, but to capture the beauty of the one I was just beginning. I framed the shot, the ancient stones of the Colosseum bathed in the golden, fading light of the setting sun. The shutter clicked. "This one's for you, Frank," I whispered to the empty chair beside me. Looking at that photo of the Roman sunset, I don't see an ending, but a new beginning I fought to reclaim. I finally understood that protecting my peace and my finances was not selfish. It was a radical act of self-respect. True family is built on a foundation of mutual respect, not on what one person can extract from another. Now, the silence in my life is filled not with loneliness, but with the quiet hum of freedom. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own peace?